for about a month while I was looking for a piece of property, and we finally bought that place on Stevens Avenue, Stevens and Orange, 328 Stevens Avenue. And it was a house, and the attic was just a attic unfinished. So I finished the attic and made an apartment, and I made the rooms downstairs for treatment rooms and examining room and waiting room and so forth. And then I opened up, and I put an ad in the paper stating that I had now opened for practice, and I'd already registered my license in the courthouse, for practice. And I enrolled, and I was already enrolled in the, we moved up there in September, and just in time for me to get in when the classes started at the university. But it was about 2 or 3 weeks or a month after that I was open for practice, maybe sometime in October or November, open for practice. And I wasn't open but a week. I had that ad in the paper. I had a visit by a man by the name of Dr. K. And he told me that, he says, I'm Dr. K. And he says, I'm the president of the Montana Chiropractic Association. I was practicing natural medicine and chiropractic under the chiropractic law here that includes both. And he says that he was the president of that, and I says, well, I said, I got my license here, He says, I know your license. And I said, well, you want to see around the place? No, he just says, I just want to come by and visit you. I said, well, fine. And I said, anything I can do for you? He said, well, he says, why did you come to Montana? I said, well, because I got a license here, and I wanted to move to the mountains. And why you want to move to the mountains? I said, well, that's a religious or personal thing. And he said, well, why to Missoula? I said, well, I'm studying clinical psychology over here. I'm enrolled in the school and enhancing my knowledge in psychology. I said, it's the only school in the state that teaches clinical, the graduate school of clinical psychology. Well, he said, well, Dr. Jensen, he says, when you get through with your course there, he says, get out of town. I said, well, get out of town? I said, why? He said, well, he says, the chiropractors are starving here. He says, we don't have much of a practice. And he said, it would have been better if you'd have went to some other place in Montana, such as Butte or someplace else, he says. But he says, they're just not making it here. Well, I says, are they practicing natural medicine? He says, no, just straight chiropractic. And I said, well, if they would practice natural methods, I said that they would, they would get their people well, and they would, and people would come to them. And he said, well, they don't have degrees in natural medicine as you and I have. He has a degree, had a degree in natural medicine too. He said they don't have a degree in it, and therefore they can't practice it. They don't know natural medicine. I said, well, we could hold classes, and teach them this. Oh, he says, you'd be insulting these people, you know what I mean? Come up with something like this, just coming to town, you're going to teach them how to practice, And I said, well, I intend to stay here, I said, regardless of what you think or anybody else thinks, I says, if they don't like it, they can drop dead, I said, I'm going to stay here. I said, I bought property, and I'm established here, and I intend to stay. So he says, well, I says, don't get sore at me, he says, because, it was just a matter of things like that, see. He says, show you that I'm not angry with you and telling you to go. He says, I belong to the Exchange Club here. And he says that we have a meeting every Tuesday. I think now they're having it every Thursday, but I think it was the only Tuesday. And he says, I'll come by, we have it at noon. He says, I'll come by and pick you up, and we go down there, and I'll buy you a lunch or a dinner. Well, I said, that's fair enough. So we went down there, and I found that this was a very political-sized thing. That there was, the mayor was there, and the people of the city council was there. There was different ones from, on the legislature that was there. Several judges were there. And he introduced me to Judge Brownlee, and I think Judge Green was there. And he also introduced me to different senators and representatives there. And, he's trying to impress me. you know. And then he says, Dr. Jensen, he says, I'm on the Central Committee of the Missoula County Democratic Society. And he said, we are the grassroots here in Missoula. And he said, these men that I introduced you to, I had a hand in getting them elected, and they owe their offices to me. And he said, and they know that. He said, without the grassroots of this committee, why, he said that they wouldn't have been able to get elected. And he said, now the Republicans that I introduced you to who are in office, he said, Dr. Gray over here is on the Republican grassroots or committee, you know. And he says that they owe their election to him. And he says, we more or less got the thing sewed up. Of course, the chiropractors are trying to do this all over the nations in a way, because the medics are always trying to get rid of chiropractors, see, in order to have that political clout. See. And I said, well, that's nice that you did this. He said, now, he said, Dr. Jensen, he says, I want to tell you one more time. He said, when you get go through with that course, he says, you get your butt out of town. As a threat, you know. Then he invited me to go down with him to the legislature, which I did, and they had a bill in there which they were lobbying to get through there, you know. So he was right up into his neck, and he went up to the different senators and representatives and shook their hands, and they knew him personally, and they received him, and showing that he was in strong. So on the way back, I told Dr. K, I said, Dr. K, I says, hell and high water, I said, they're not going to get me to leave this state. He says, well, you see. Later, I found out that he and the other chiropractors were Masons, and they were running the chairs, different offices, climbing up to the top. See? And that and then later one of the men in the top, he was a real estate man, I finally bought a house from him, told me that they were cooking up a kettle of fish to try to get me out of town. And what they want to do is to try to get me in court and to have them expel me from Missoula. Well, I didn't know how the hell they were going to try to do that, but I would see them out in front of my office talking to patients as they come out of my office. We call that buttonholing, you know, grab them and you know, and well, I don't know what they're talking about. And then they were holding meetings at the different chiropractic offices. I go home at night and I pass Dr. K's office, and here would be the cars of the different other chiropractors there, you know, or Dr. One on Russell and South Avenue. I don't remember all their names anymore. Anyhow, they were having these meetings. And finally one day, the sheriff come and arrested me and charged me with a lewd and lascivious act on a minor. And, well, hell, I've never, I mean, I was dumbfounded with such a thing, you know. Well, it so happened that the girl that was involved in this was at the time I treated her, she was 15 years old. Her mother and father brought her in, and Opal and I examined her. We found that her complaint was that she had a menstrual disorder, pain on menses. She was constipated, go 3 or 4 days without moving her bowels, and a pain in the lower back. And we figured that this was all associated. The pain in the back, the constipation, and the menstrual disorder. We x-rayed her back, we x-rayed her colon, and we gave her an examination. We found that the uterus that the colon had dropped down on the uterus and flipped it over backwards and was strangling it so that she couldn't, the menses wouldn't come out in menses, you know, and was causing the pain. So it was a common thing that occurs, you know. I mean, this is a very common thing, and chiropractic has been very effective in natural method been very effective in treating this. Instead of putting them on Midol and other pills for menses and giving them laxatives and things like this, I laid out a course of treatments, of adjustments to the back. She had some subluxations there. We put her on something called deterge to clean out her colon. She had a mucus colitis, a ptosis of the colon laying on the uterus. We went in and flipped the uterus over forward after we raised the colon. We used galvanic treatment to exercise the muscles there, give her some exercises to take it home for this. And of course, when you're treating a female that has female disorders and has colon disorders, you're going to have to examine these things, and you're going to, and in doing this, now in her case, we couldn't go into the uterus because she a virgin. She had this, so we went into the rectum, and we found that the colon was backwards. You know, we can go through the rectum and find this. And now this was all misconstrued in court as being a lute lascivious act. And it was nothing but a damn bunch of chicanery by the chiropractors in this state that had threatened me time and time again to get me out of this state because, or out of this city, because they didn't want me here. Well, I finally went to trial and was convicted and was sentenced to the Montana State Prison for 20 years. And I was just completely flabbergasted, completely disillusioned. I knew that our system in this country wasn't perfect, and the people in this country claim that it's not perfect. The system itself isn't so imperfect as it is that the political faction is lousy, and that they will do anything. Now this person that tried my case, the assistant county attorney, was running for county attorney. And when he ran for county attorney, he says he sent one of the most dangerous criminals to prison for 20 years, Dr. Jensen. And I had done nothing. The lawyers that defended me says, Dr. Jensen, you have nothing to worry about. He says, my brother-in-law is the county attorney in Great Falls, and he's running for state's attorney. He says, when we go, he says, they brought in, they paid a lot of women to come in and testify against me, you know. He says, I'm not even going to question these women. He said, because it's all irrelevant. They can't testify to whether what I did with this girl, you know what I mean? Because they weren't present. And he says that after, he says, if you get convicted, he says, my brother-in-law will become the state's attorney, and he'll bring it in before the Supreme Court, and he'll get a reversal. Nothing to worry about. And therefore, in the trial, if he would have questioned these women, he could have proved that they were just lying, you know what I mean? That they, even maybe that they were getting paid for doing this. But every time, when they asked him if he wanted to question him, he said, no, their testimony is irrelevant. It's not relevant to the main to the case. And of course, I was convicted. And then, just after I was convicted, it was time for the election, there was a big scandal took place in Great Falls, that in that district there was prostitution houses run by a madam there that controlled it. And they tried to show that he was receiving bribes, you know, to keep it going, see? And this hit the headlines, and it took up the space in the paper just like Oliver North is now, you know what I mean? So that ruined his chances to be elected. And I was convicted and went to the Supreme Court, and there was no brother-in-law to take it in there and get it reversed. So he said that he would continue to defend me all the way up to the Supreme Court. And he says, if we lose in the Supreme Court, then we'll start all over again and go back up through the Supreme Court. In fact, he said he'd sue to the last cent of my money, you know. To get me out of it took the rest of his life. Well, my God, I saw I was in a big pickle, so I got in prison. And I says, oh God, why does this misjustice happen to somebody that's been a servant, you know, to the cause of God all these years? Why does this allow such a travesty of things like this? And it didn't shake my faith in God or my religion at all. But there must be answers to this, you know, that God is all powerful. And then I happen to remember in the Baha'i faith it says, we must accept our lot in life with radiant acquiescence. And of course, during the time of the martyrs, there's 10,000 bobbies that went to the chopping block, cut up by knives. They drilled holes in their chests and put lighted candles, paraded them through the streets naked with rings in their nose, with horseshoes nailed to their feet. I mean, all of these things take place in part of God's plan, you know what I mean? And God will allow Jesus Christ to go to the cross. God allowed the forerunner to Baha'u'llah to be martyred. God allowed Baha'u'llah to spend 40 years in prison and in exile. So I said, what is the reason for me being here? You know what I mean? And I was praying and I was studying, going through the Baha'i faith and things like this. And this went on for about 6 weeks, to such an extent that I was wondering, you know, what this was all going to be about. And then I received a letter from the guardian of the Baha'i faith. I'm going to pass this out here to the different ones here and pass them around. And then here I have one for myself here. So here, it says here, and I got this in my cell at about 11 o'clock in the morning, 10:30, 11, the mail come. And if you see written on the top of it, it says, for Dr. Leland Jensen from the Guardian of the Orthodox Baha'i World Faith. And it says, care of the American Express, Florence, Italy. The Guardian had moved from Washington to Florence, Italy, and he sent this on September the 13th of 1969. I got into prison on August the 8th of 1969. So I was in there about 5 weeks when I get this letter. And this letter here to me, it was greatly overdue. He says, some days ago, I was astonished to have word that Rex King and 2 young men were below wishing to see me. I sent word back to say that I would like very much to see Rex, but not the young men. I had things I wanted to tell him, but not them. I told Rex that no one of my acquaintance had a better knowledge of the Baha'i faith than he, but as Lucifer in the Old Testament days chose to put truth aside and espouse the cause of Satan, so had he done in these modern times, decided that he would now assume the station of Satan in these days of the dispensation of Christ, despite the many opportunities that I had given him to change his evil ways. Yet he refused and blatantly insisted on maintaining his satanic intentions, therefore obliging me to cast him out from all association in this world with the people of God that include the life to come, as well as his life here upon earth, his station to be ever and eternally that of Satan forevermore. Charles Mason Reamy. I was stunned. I said, I had mixed feelings. First of all, I knew that he was very satanic, Rex King. I knew that this was way overdone. I mean, way over, it should have been done much sooner. I was writing in The Guardian what Rex King was doing way back there in 63, 64. And in 64, when I moved to Missoula, I disassociated with myself with everything Rex and these Baha'is were doing down there in Santa Fe. The Guardian kept writing to him, if you don't straighten out, I'm going to dissolve it. And in 1966, he dissolved that assembly. And he wrote to Rex King, and he says, send me the minutes of all the meetings that you've had. And also send me all the correspondence. And Rex King blatantly refused to supply the Guardian at his request, in strict violation of what he was supposed to do. And then the Guardian then found that the Baha'i administration that Shoghi Effendi set up was not the Baha'i administration, that there's no Baha'i administration. No place in any of the writings is there a Baha'i administration. Okay? That he'd resurrected the Babi administration, dressed it up and made it Baha'i. And the Baha'i faith, Abdu'l-Baha said the Baha'i faith is never to be organized. Okay? But Shoghi Effendi found that the only way that he could take and run this whole thing and get this faith spread around it was to have an organization. But the only way is to have an organization, and then when Horace Holly come up with an organization and got it, legalized it and everything else, Shoghi Effendi accepted this, and it was along the lines of the Babi administration that he had, and Shoghi Effendi just started calling it the Baha'i administration. Now, if he just said that it was the Babi administration was only temporary, that would be one thing. But the people got the idea that this was supposed to become the Universal House of Justice, you know, that this thing. But it was Shoghi Effendi's International Baha'i Council that was to become a world court and then evolve into the House of Justice. And this International Baha'i Council was aborted in 1959 by the Hands of the Faith. And they went and established what they called the Universal House of Justice. But they had it elected not with national spiritual, or with national houses of justice, but with national spiritual assemblies. And according to the Will and Testament, it has to be elected by national houses or secondary houses of justice. And it didn't have the Guardian as its head, and without the head, it couldn't be the Baha'i Universal House of Justice. So the Guardian comes up that all of this administration was not Baha'i. So then one might ask the question, well then what is the Universal House of Justice and the Guardian? This is a world government. As the people become Baha'is, this will be the government of the world. We have no Baha'i administration. We're not a religion per se, with a religious organization to compete with the Catholic and the Protestants and things like that. We don't have an organization. What Baha'u'llah brought was the kingdom of God on earth, and he says, and Abdu'l-Baha says, is a democratic monarchy, like they have in England. It's not a religion per se, but a democratic monarchy. And the House of Justice will be the democratic part, like the Parliament in England, with the kingship, the Guardian being the king. And the Guardian is to guard the government by being the Davidic king. That's why it's called the Guardian. So he dissolved this this National Spiritual Assembly and then declared the administration throughout the world as not Baha'i, and anybody remaining in that administration is outside of the Baha'i faith. So all the covenant breakers out here that have taken over the institutions, that have taken over the money and the role of believers and everything, they're all outside of the faith because they're in that they're that has been destroyed or taken out of the Baha'i faith. So here I received this letter from Mason Remy after he had dissolved that administration and that assembly there that I was on. And here Rex King, from the time that that was dissolved in 1968 until 1969, busied himself by continued correspondence. He was already the secretary. He had the names and everything else of all the Baha'is in this country, and he had accumulated Baha'is in Europe, as well as the names of the Baha'is that I had that I brought into the faith in the islands, you know, and also in Africa. And he'd contacted them and started saying that the Guardian, in getting rid of this administration, has lost his marbles. You know, the old man's getting old, and that they need to have a younger man to be Guardian. And they said, yeah, that's a good idea. Because these people believed that that administration was the Baha'i faith. So they were all backing Rex, and he had 500 letters when he went to the Guardian here. And he brought 2 of his adopted sons to be witnesses. He was going to have a confrontation with the Guardian on this whole question. But the Guardian is astute, and he knew what Rex was up to. So he told him, send up Rex, but not the boys, you know what I mean? And when he came in, he embraced Rex and kissed him on both cheeks. And he said, Rex, he says, we're like brothers. He says, when I was in Washington, D.C., one whole summer you came down there, lived at the mansion there, and we did a lot of effective teaching. And we had good times, we went over a lot of the teachings, and he says that you have a wonderful knowledge of the Baha'i faith, he says. But as Satan, he said, for a long time I know now that you've been Satan. And it's probably all the way back to when I was writing to the Guardian, telling him what Rex was doing. That he realized that this man was maybe a loose cannon on the ship, see, that they're accusing Oliver North with him. And this man is a Rambos. He was like Chorus Holly, and that he corrupted the Baha'i faith under Shoghi Effendi. Here, Rex King was trying to get control and given the believers what they wanted, given that organization back in which he would be the Guardian. And he proposed to the Guardian, he was going to propose to the Guardian, that the Guardian appoint him to be the Regent Guardian, which sometimes happens in a kingship. When the king gets too old or the child is too young, they have a regent to take care of the affairs of the king during the time of sickness or old age or when he's youth until he gets old enough to take the throne. So he was proposing that the Guardian appoint him to be regent. But the Guardian says, you're Satan, and expelled him from the Baha'i faith. Well, Rex King then decides that he was deflated. And then he gets a hold of Joe Marangello that had a letter that wasn't supposed to open it until the Guardian passes on. And he tells Joe Marangello, he says, in that letter, he writes to him, tell him, in that letter, the Guardian has appointed you to be his successor. He says, open the letter. The man has lost his mind. Okay? Calling me Satan, you know. So Joe opened up, and sure enough, he says, after my passing, he says, you are the Guardian of the Baha'i faith. Well, when the Guardian hears about this, he says, well, he says, I told Joel not to open it until I died. He says, now that he's disobeyed me, he could never be Guardian. So he supports supports Joel and gets all the believers away from Masonry under Joel Marangello to be Guardian. Joel was living in Switzerland at that time. And I'd met Joel in France when I was on the way to the islands. Joel and I were kids together, you know, in the Baha'i faith. He was a nice fellow, but he very had an ego too, you know, wanted to be something. So after about a year, Joe had put his son in charge, he got him elected to be the treasurer. And then they found that he was absconding with the funds. He was attending college in Washington. He was taking out girls in expensive limousines and having fast parties and everything else and spend all the money that was in the fund. So Rex King splits the group, tell him that Joe is corrupt and his son is corrupt. And then he sets himself up as the Regent Guardian. So now there's there's Joe Marangello's Baha'i faith and Rex King's Baha'i faith. And all of the followers of Masonry in these two groups, a lot of them aren't anything, you know what I mean? And it was corruption, corruption, corruption. See? So I gets this letter here. He'd gone to see the Guardian in 1969, and presented him with this, that he's to be the regent guardian, and here he points him as Satan. Well, I says, it's about time that the guardian took action on this man, But he didn't do it until he destroyed the Baha'i faith underneath the guardian. I received this letter at about 11 o'clock, and I read it, and I meditated on it, and I wondered just what is going to happen. Practically the whole Baha'i faith is destroyed, So I was somewhat disenchanted. I knew there was an answer to these things. So I went to lunch. It was just about noontime, and we went over to the chow hall, and it takes about 45 minutes for lunch, and I came back. When I came back from chow, I found this Bible that had been tossed in between the bars of my cell, and it landed on my table, and it was open to this page here. There is a stiff page here, because there's a picture, a colored picture, and it so happened that it landed open on that, but this was sitting straight up. So when I come back in, I picked it up, and I knew it didn't come down out of the sky and out of heaven. And I held my hand at this place, and I looked in the front, and I found that this was Myron Gardapi's Bible. His parents had given it to him. They thought he might, become religious. And he was going out on parole. He told me a day or two before that that he was going out on parole. And one of the things that they usually do is they leave something of themselves to their friends as a momentum, friendship. And I befriended Myron, and he knew I was religious, and he didn't care about the Bible or religion anyhow. So he just threw it in my cell. He didn't know what to do with it. He didn't want to take it out with him. And here it was open to this page, and I read over here and what it says here, because I'm always a stickler that these things just don't happen by accident. I always feel that there is possibly a bigger reason or cause for things to happen. Many times I'll just take a book and open it up and then start reading, And it usually has a message. Sometimes it's a message that I've been mulling over, the answer to a question I've been mulling over in my mind. There's the answer. So it goes on the next page, and I get over to chapter 3, and I start reading there, and it says, "And he showed me Joshua, the high priest, standing before the angel of the Lord, and Satan standing in his right hand to resist him." I said, I said, this is a coincidence. Here's a fellow by the name of Joshua that was opposed by Satan, the same as I was. I was a knight of Baha'u'llah. I had one of the most effective teachers in the United States, bringing thousands of people into the cause. And here, Rex King had taken over the Baha'i faith and destroyed it. So it says that, and he did it. He had to get rid of me, which he did, by the tactics that he did. In order to get this far, he thought he would be able to wrench it out of the hands of the guardian, which he wasn't able to do. So here, Rex King had resisted me the same as this Joshua fellow. See? And the Lord said to Satan, "The Lord rebuked thee, O Satan." I said, oh my gosh. The Satan got rebuked in the time of Joshua, and here, like Rex King is being rebuked by the guardian here. I was seeing the correlate between the two here, you know what I mean? And I was listening to one of the ministers from the Armstrong group the other night. He says there's always a parallel in the Bible. For instance, something happens in the Bible, and then this is sort of a prophecy of things that might going to take place, or it happens twice. Okay? And for instance, there's been two Christs come. Jesus was the first Christ, Baha'u'llah the second, you know. And it's about the same type of conditions that surrounded them both, takes place with both of them. Okay? But I wasn't thinking along these lines. I was just thinking along the lines that here is a coincidence of something that happened to Joshua that's happening to me. Okay? And he says, even the Lord that has chosen Jerusalem rebuke thee. Is this not a brand plucked out of the fire? Well, when Rex King became, come under the guardian, Mrs. Norton said, well, she was the one that was in correspondence with him. And she says, I plucked him out of the fire, you know. So that happened to come to my mind, that this man was plucked out of the fire by Brenda Norton. So then it says, now Joshua was clothed with filthy garments and stood before the angel. Oh, I said, my gosh. I said, when I got to prison the first time I went to chow hall, going through the yard and the other inmates sitting out in the yard and stuff, they say, dirty jacket, dirty jacket, dirty jacket. The type of beef that I was sent there, a dude in the Civius Act, was called a dirty jacket. Now, if I had committed murder or robbed some old woman of her money or something like that, they would think I was a great guy. But this type of beef, they don't associate with you in prison. It's a dirty jacket. See? So here I'm wearing a dirty jacket, and this Joshua's wearing a dirty jacket. See, wearing dirty garments. Here's some more of the parallel. And he answered and spake unto those that stood before him, take away the filthy garments from him. And unto him he said, behold, I have caused thine iniquity to pass from thee, and I will clothe thee with a change of raiment. Later on, I looked this up in Holly's handbook, you know, for Christians, and they said that this Joshua here was Jesus, you know, that this pertained to the Jesus, the coming of Jesus, you know. Later on, I looked this up, and they referred to it on his first coming. See? Well, Jesus didn't wear a dirty jacket, and he wasn't, you know, like that. So, and he answered and spake unto those that stood before him, take away the filthy garments from him. And unto him he said, behold, I have caused thine iniquity to pass from thee, and will clothe thee with a change of raiment. I said, well, now this happened to this Joshua here. Is that going to happen to me? I was wondering, you know, there's a parallel, you know. Then I said, and it says, and I said, let them set a fair mitre on his head. I said, what's a fair mitre? So I looked up in the dictionary, and it was the turban of the high priest. And it's the fair mitre, meaning he gets the turban when he reaches a certain state of spiritual knowledgement and spiritual character and knowledge. He gets the fair mitre. It also refers to the mitre board that the college graduate wears when he graduates. They call it a mitre board, the same type of board that the plasters use to hold plaster. You know, it's a flat on top, see? They call that a mitre board in plastering. So they're going to, I said, well, he got a mitre board. Does iniquity pass from him? Is this going to happen to me? See? And the angel protested unto Joshua, saying, thus saith the Lord of hosts, if thou wilt walk in my ways, and if thou wilt keep my charge, and thou shalt also judge my house, and shalt also keep my courts. Well, Shoki Effendi was in the process of establishing national Baha'i courts in the Islamic East when he died. And that's why he was going to have International House of Justice on Mount Carmel in '63, in order for those local courts to appeal to. Okay? And it says, well, is this applying to the Baha'i faith? I started thinking here, you know, maybe this applies to the Baha'i faith too, because there's such a parallel of what's happening in the Baha'i faith. And I will give thee a place to walk among those that stand by. Hear now, Joshua the high priest, and thou and thy fellows that sit before thee, for they are men wondered at. For behold, I will bring forth thy servant the branch, and the word branch is in capital letters, capital B, capital R, capital A, capital N, capital C, capital H. And I'm reading from the King James Version. The reason I'm taking it from the King James Version is because this is the Bible that was shoved into the cell. And this is the version I should take it from. The very one that was given to me way back there in 1969. That's about 18 years ago. And this has been in my possession in meetings and when I teach the faith all that time. So it says the branch in capital letters. I said, well, my God, The branch is Abdu'l-Baha. We study that in Baha'u'llah's covenant when he appoints Abdu'l-Baha to be the most great branch, to be his successor. See? And the branch, all the guardians are called branches. It says that if Shoghi Effendi's son doesn't have the spiritual qualities, he must choose another branch. So this is the Davidic kingship. Right? I said, my gosh, this isn't history. This is a prophecy. This is a prophecy of what's going to take place now. At that time when I was there. But I says, oh my gosh, I says, then I started thinking, what am I thinking? What am I saying? Am I this person? I said, far be it from me to have such, thoughts of such a nature. I never, dreamed of being anything, Of course, I didn't know why I was sent to that prison, why I was there, and I was becoming very befuddled, and I didn't feel comfortable with myself or what was happening there. It was very, very disturbing, to say the least. Then he said, for behold, the stone that I have laid before Joshua, upon one stone shall be 7 eyes. Behold, I will engrave the engraving thereof, saith the Lord of hosts. I says, stone with 7 eyes. I says, how can a stone have 7 eyes? I looked around to see if there's any stones laying around. No stones. I said, a potato could have eyes, But how can a stone have 7 eyes? I counted the bars in my cell and the windows and everything else. I says, well, there's no stone before me. So I don't have to worry about this pertaining to me. And I was very much relieved, I was very, very much relieved that I was, that it didn't pertain to me. And at that moment, I had a visitation. And it says, Dr. Jensen, he says, you are the Joshua of this 3rd chapter of Zechariah. And he says, you will establish the branch in the world. And at first when he told me, it sounded like he says, you are the branch. And I said, get away, I don't want to have anything. Then it comes that I would be establishing it. See? So I told the spirit, or whoever was, angel, whatever it was that was there, I didn't see anything, but I felt something. And I knew that there was a strong presence there, telling me that I was this. And I told him to leave. I says, I don't want to be perverted or corrupted with such a thing. I'm a very practical person, you know what I mean? And if I had practical evidence of something of this nature, I'd accept it. But just because an angel tells me that I'm this or that, like the Spirit of God descended upon Jesus as a dove, or in Muhammad, the angel Gabriel came to him in the cave of Hira, you know what I mean? I was like Muhammad. Muhammad ran home to Khadijah, and it says, he was very frightened. He says that an angel told him that he was the prophet of God. And she said, what angel was it? And he says, it was Gabriel. She said, well, Gabriel is a good angel. And if he tells you this, he says, you are the prophet. And she became his first believer. But I didn't have a Khadijah to go home to. I was in a cell. Okay? And I was very much disturbed. And I told the angel to beat it, just like Muhammad did. He ran out of the cave, and the angel followed him out. Okay? So he was very disturbed on this. So I said, well, there's no stone with 7 eyes. I don't have to worry about it. So that I just, I said that this would be, it's nothing to worry about. Well, at this particular time, they were trying to get me to go to work. The doctor says I didn't have to work. I had trouble breathing. I have a little bronchitis. And to do work, it riles it up, physical work. I mean, it was things that I didn't have to have any, physical part to it. I'd probably be all right. But he says I didn't have to work. So I've been busy writing. The Guardian Mason Remy had told me that I was going to write a book and that he was going to publish it. And I never had a chance to write a book. I was always too busy. When I opened my practice in Missoula, I was going to school in the daytime, and I was practicing at night, you know what I mean? And at first I was fixing up the office at night and practicing in the daytime. And I was up to midnight. I was busy from early morning to midnight. I was busy doing things. I never had a chance. All the time I was in Joplin or any place along, I had no time to write a book. But now I have plenty of time, so I started writing a book. I didn't know what exactly to write, but I said I'm supposed to write a book. What am I going to write, you know? Hmm? So the deputy warden called me up to the office quite often and asked me, Dr. Jensen, don't you think it'd be a good idea for you to take a job here in the prison? I says, I don't need 10 cents a day. That's all they paid, you know. He says, no, he says, but you might go stir crazy in that cell, you know. Oh, I says, I got good company. He said, well, who's in there with you? Well, I says, I got a very good companion. He says, who's that? I said, myself. And I says, I'm good company to me. You don't need to worry about me. And I says, I'm writing a book. I have a typewriter in there. And I'm, you know, getting the manuscript written. Okay, but he kept calling me. Well, one day, he called me up there and he said, Dr. Jensen, would you like to go to work? And I said, no. But the day before that, there was a man in the, not the next cell, but the cell down from that. He heard me typing in my cell, and he says, Dr. Jensen, is that you typing? I says, yeah. He said, oh, thank God I found somebody that knows how to type. He says, I'm working in the fingerprint department up there. And he says, I've passed parole and I'm ready to go out on parole, but he says, I don't have a trade. And they told me that if I went out to Rothy Hall, which is about 7 miles from the prison, they have a meat packing plant out there. And he said that if I went out there, they would teach me meat cutting. And they have several jobs of meat cutting available if I would get out there. But they won't let me go out there because they have nobody to fulfill my position there in the fingerprint department because they haven't anybody that knows how to type in the prison. He said, will you take this job? I said, no, I don't want to work. I said, go ahead with your job, you know. So the deputy called me up there again, and he says, what would you do if you was going to go to work? Why, so this here fella in this here next cell to me, or the next cell down from there, that's fingerprinting, and he made parole, and he needs to get somebody to take his job so he can go out and to Rothy Hall and learn meat cutting. He said, that's your job. He said, you can go to work at that. I said, well, I says, I get tired all of a sudden quickly. When I get tired, I says, I have to lay down. And this is one of the reasons the doctors told me that I didn't have to work, because when I get tired, I'm tired. I said, I just have to lay right down right then. He says, all right, we'll make this in part of your work sheet that you, at any time that you feel tired, just tell them that you're tired and you can go up to your house and go to sleep, see, or lay down, anything you want to do. I said, fine. In that condition, I took it. After I was there for in that job for several weeks, I heard one of the guards saying, they're bringing another one in. Well, I was up in the administration department, and it says that they're bringing another one in through Tower 7. That means they're bringing another convict in, a new convict. And I looked out the window, and here it's a 2-story tower. Upstairs there's a man with a gun and its windows all the way around. Below there's a door to the street and a door to the prison yard. They open the door from the street and he goes into a room. They electrically close the door, lock it, and then they open the door to the prison yard, and a sheriff was bringing a man handcuffed out of that room into the prison yard, and then they come up the steps to the administration. And I asked the guard, I looked out there and I saw this happening. I says, you said that the Tower 7. I says, how many towers does this prison wall have? I said, that is a stone wall out there, isn't it? He said, every bit of it's a stone wall. I said, how many towers? He said there was 7. 7 towers. I says, and he said, that's Tower 7. I said, well, where's the other tower? He said, well, over there in that corner is Tower 1, and the other corner is Tower 2, and the other corner is Tower 3, and then in the middle there's Tower 4, and the other corner Tower 5, and then the other corner Tower 6. And he says, you come in through Tower 7, you go out through Tower 7. So I stood up and I turned around, and every way that I turned, I had a stone with 7 eyes before me. This is a picture of this stone with 7 eyes. Come up closer. This is Tower 7. Down here in this corner is Tower 1. Over here is Tower 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then 7. So no matter which way I turned, I had the stone with 7 eyes before me. Here is the administration building where I was looking out of, right in here, looking out down to here. They was coming in through this tower, coming into the prison yard. So I'm going to give you a copy of this stone with 7 eyes. After this happened, I became very, very disturbed. I just become very emotional. And I told the guard, I says, I'm tired. I says, I have to go and lay down. Oh, he says, go ahead. He says, you can go back to your bailiwick, you know. So I went back up there and I looked in the mirror and I was white as a ghost. I says, my God. I says, this is the only thing that I objected to being this person, was that all the conditions wasn't fulfilled. I didn't have a stone with 7 eyes before me. Now I find that I have it before me. I was opposed by Satan on April the 21st of 1963. This is, it started in 628, the 1335 days. Subtract that from the 1335, you get, or you add 628 to it, you get 1963. Abdu'l-Baha said, we've got this already in the testimony, that Abdu'l-Baha said that this was to take place exactly 100 years from Baha'u'llah's proclamation. And exactly 100 years from Baha'u'llah's proclamation, Rex King came and attended that Feast of Rizwan in Santa Fe and started talking against me, which caused me to be elected 9th place, where ordinarily I'd have probably had the highest number of votes. But his object was to do away with me, just like the covenant breakers were trying to do away with the guardian. He was trying to do away with me because he knew I would be guarding the faith. So I was opposed by Satan on that date given by Daniel, and I had the stone with 7 eyes before me, and my mission is to establish the branch, which the covenant breakers have done away with. They've done away with the kingship, the branch. This is succession from Baha'u'llah. My job is the establisher of the Baha'i faith. I fulfilled the prophecies for the 7th angel that Abdu'l-Baha said is going to establish the Baha'i faith. I fulfilled the prophecies. Name? What is the name for? Well, we have to find a name, don't we? Otherwise it doesn't work. So let's go back to the scripture again. And it says here, in that 9th verse of the 3rd chapter of Zechariah, and I'll read it again. For behold, the stone that I have laid before Joshua, upon one stone shall be 7 eyes. There's another stone. I was born in a stone house. So, but one of these stones, the one I was born in, and the one I was behind here, one of them would have 7 eyes. And the one I was in here had 7 eyes. Behold, I will engrave the grave thereof, saith the Lord of hosts. I'll remove the iniquity of that land in 1 day. Wow. That land. I looked in other Bibles and it says the land. Well, that's my name. The land. Leland, Ellie is French for the. When I was over in the French islands, and I told him my name is Leland, he says, oh, you're the land, you know. And that's how I happen to know this is my name. And the iniquities of Joshua is going to be removed in one day. And in the fourth verse, he says he's going to remove the iniquities of Joshua. Here he's going to remove the iniquities of the land. Well, the iniquity of the land and the iniquity of Joshua was what? The dirty garment. My iniquity was the dirty garment, that's what I was in prison for. And Joshua's iniquity was the dirty garment, remember? So the Joshua and the land is the same person. Is the name in which the establisher, the seventh angel, is going to establish the branch. And the reason that I've been able to be successful in doing this is that I fulfill the name. Will you write that up there, Joe? The name is, write the word name. And in there you put right after the name, you put the land, put in parentheses Leland, okay, we've got the date up there. Now the name, the address is the stone with 7 eyes. And the mission is to bring forth and establish the branch. That is the Davidic kingship, the continuation of the Davidic kingship. Now, where is this stone with 7 eyes? We need to know to make sure that this is the proper stone with 7 eyes. And I'm reading from the 6th chapter of Zechariah. We were reading from the 3rd chapter, and I'll read there. And I turned and lifted up mine eyes and looked, and behold, there were 4 chariots coming between 2 mountains, and the mountains were mountains of brass. In other versions it says copper. The Hebrew word for copper, brass, and bronze is all the same word, by the way. It doesn't make any difference which one they use. It means the same thing. And the Montana State Prison with the stone with 7 eyes is between the 2 biggest mountains of brass in the world. Butte is the richest hill in the world. They got more copper and brass out of there than any other place in the world. And there's a bigger deposits of copper in Lincoln, Montana. And the Deer Lodge and the prison is halfway between these 2 mountains of brass. Okay? He says he saw 4 chariots coming between 2 mountains of brass, and the mountains were mountains of brass. In the first chariot were red horses, in the second chariot were black horses, the third chariot were white horses, the fourth chariot were grizzled and bay horses. Then I answered and said unto the angel that talked to me, What are these, my Lord? And the angel answered and said unto me, These are the 4 spirits of the heavens that go forth from standing before the Lord of all the earth. In other words, these are 4 spirits, not chariots at all. And out of this prison has come the core of the Baha'i faith under the guardianship. This stone with 7 eyes is in the Bible. Joshua the high priest. And if you read it in the Catholic Bible, it says Jesus the high priest. Baha'u'llah fulfilled the prophecies for the second Christ or the return of Christ, which means a descendant of David that's anointed. Okay? But the high priest is not a descendant of David. The high priest is a descendant of Aaron, of the Aaronic priesthood. But Jesus was a high priest not after the order of Aaron, but after the order of Melchizedek. And I'm after that order of Melchizedek. As Melchizedek was the only person at that time in his lifetime that was against the triune God, the paganism that was being established by Nimrod. Jesus was a high priest after the order of Melchizedek, establishing the one true God. But this paganism came into Christianity and took over Christianity. So I'm the return of Jesus, the high priest, whose mission is to fight against this Babylonian whore religion of the Trinity, which I am doing. And I'm establishing it in the world. And as the covenant breakers broke away from this kingship and this branch that's talked about here, I went down just this last April and I sieged the Tower of Babel, the Tower of Jericho, this wall of oppression around the covenant-breaking followers of the covenant breakers, to let the truth trickle through. We made a crack. And all over the United States, they are now talking about what I had done. See? And Jim Quinlan of the Sun-Times has already, and on April the 29th, I sent out a message to the entire community in Chicago, to the various papers, to the various radio stations and television stations. I sent out 130 of them, also with a book entitled Breaking the Covenant by the Hands of the Faith, and another one, The Kingdom of God in America, an introduction to the Baha'i faith. And this is the trumpet sound of this seventh angel. I fulfill the prophecy.